Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome back to Sword Wolf Forge. Today we're going to start our second video on our Knife Making 101 series. And basically this is geared towards beginners or somebody that's never even made a knife and wants to get started. So today's topic is going to be steels. And when I say steels, there's hundreds and thousands of different kinds of steels out there. So what I'm going to do is break down and give you some tips that I've picked up over the years and help you find what kind of steel you need to begin with. Now, also keep in mind now, these are how I do things. That doesn't mean that it's the gospel or it's solid, but this is how I do things. So I'm going to take a lot of the guesswork out there because all these steels can be very overwhelming, and that could make the difference between a paperweight and a really nice knife. So let's get started. So here we have a whole collection of different kinds of steels. Some of these are good, and some of these you do not want to touch. Now, steel in its simplest form is iron mixed with carbon. And that makes steel. And what they do to change qualities in the steel is they'll add vanadium or molybdenum or tungsten. There's all kinds of stuff that they can add to the steel to change the properties. Now, these are things that you really don't need to worry about right now, okay? You're just getting started. What I want to focus on today is to get you a better starting point of what steel to use and how do you use it. So over here, I have a collection of scrap stuff that I picked up left and right. I even have railroad spikes. Now that being said, you hear about railroad spike knives all the time, and I make them as well sometimes. But railroad spikes do not have enough carbon in them to give you, to harden up enough to get you a really decent blade. They're fun to practice with. They make great conversation pieces. And again, sometimes I do make them, but if the customer wants a decent blade, I'm not doing it. Now, again, all these are different kinds of steels. Some are mild steels. Some of these, I have no idea. So if you're going to be making a blade, do you want to make a blade out of something you have no idea what you're using? No. So the best thing to do if you want to collect this stuff, that's fine. I do use this stuff sometimes for tools, fabrications, or something like that. But as far as knife making goes, no, don't do it. Over here, I have several different types of steels, high carbon steels that I use in the shop. And it took me years to understand these steels. But depending on what kind of knife I'm wanting or the customer wants, I will choose the steel that I want for that blade. So here's like 1084. I've just started using some Pops Pro Cut. I have some 5160 here, some 8670, and sometimes I use W2. Now, I kind of mentioned this, but these numbers here do mean things. It means, it tells people what kind of carbon content's in it, what other, whatever additives they put into this steel. Again, this is something that you really don't need to know at this point in time when you're getting started. Steels alone can get super overwhelming. There's always an expert around the corner. and you don't need that when you're getting started. What I suggest is picking one steel and sticking to it until you really understand how that steel works and the heat treat. So again, no, yes. And next what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of run down a couple of the steels that I would suggest that are really good for a beginner and how to purchase them. Okay, before I go into recommended steels, here are some of the things you need to ask yourself why you're doing this, or why do bladesmiths do this in the first place? Because I told you about, low carbon steels or this or that. So what are the things that you're wanting to think about when you're picking a steel? So the first thing that you might want to think about is it easy to forge? How hard is it to forge? Does it have to be at a certain temperature to really be able to move the steel? Some steels are really easy to forge. Some are a bear. So this is one of the considerations we take when we're trying to choose a steel. Another thing is heat treat. Now, being new, you probably don't understand all the properties of heat treating, but it is one of the most critical steps in bladesmithing. It's when you're changing the properties of steel to accommodate what you want it to do as far as a good knife. I'm going to have a separate video on heat treating. We're going to get more in depth on that later. But simplified, heat treat, availability. How easy is it to source your materials? Do I have to call one factory in Germany because that's the only place it's made? Or can I get this from multiple suppliers? Because sometimes I've run into this. I want to get a certain steel. I'm out of it. I've got to order it. And the supplier that I prefer is out of it. Well, I'm on a crunch. It's crunch time for me. I need to get this knife made. Can I go to another supplier if I need to and source this steel? So that's another thing that you want to keep in mind when selecting a steel. Toughness. I don't know if I'm spelling all this right, but you know what I'm doing. How tough is the steel? What steel, what kind of knife are you making? That's all going to sit there and determine what steel you want to get or purchase. Now again, when you're first starting out, I suggest to pick one steel. And all this will make more sense when we start making our knife and when we're doing the heat treat process. But there are certain steels that are good for maybe a kitchen knife, but are really not good for a hunting knife. Or maybe it might be good for a hunting knife, but it's not good for a fillet knife. So what we want to do when we're first starting is keep it simple and get an all-around good steel for what we want to accomplish. Edge retention. Will it hold an edge? It's as simple as that. If I put an edge on this thing and the customer whittles a stick or cuts a steak or something and they call me back a week later, hey, this thing's dull. Well, something's wrong. It's either the steel or I messed up on the heat treat. So these are some of the things, and I'm sure there's other things that you might want to consider when picking a steel, But these are some of the simplest things that you want to focus on when we're going to be choosing a steel that we want to start off with. Okay, now that we got out of the way some of the things that we're looking for in our steel, I'm going to run down some of the steels that I suggest that a beginner use. Okay, there's only a couple of them. And again, this is my prerogative. Doesn't mean it's the gospel. But I highly suggest that if you're starting out bladesmithing, that you try these steels, or one of them. First one I'm going to suggest is 5160. This is a spring steel. They used to make leaf springs on cars with this steel. It is tough. It's very durable. It's easy to get. It's not too hard to forge. It's tougher than some, but it is forgeable. And it has a very forgiving heat treat. So especially if you don't have a heat treat oven, you're using your forge, I highly suggest 5160. Another beginner steel would be 1084. This is another steel that I started out with. It's fairly easy to find. It's easy to forge. The heat treat is pretty forgiving as well. So it's good if you're heat treating in a forge. I mean, preferably you want a heat treat oven, but right now you're a beginner, so you're going to be heat treating in a forge. So these two steels right here are number ones. Okay. Number twos would be something like 8670. It's fairly similar to 5160. I've used it a couple times. I started getting into it more. Still testing around with it. It's not too hard to forge. The heat treat is still pretty forgiving. And if you notice, the common denominator we're having here is the heat treat. Okay? That's the biggest key right now, is the heat treat. 15N20. It's not too bad as well. It's easy to find. It has a higher nickel content, and so it resists corrosion a little bit better than some of the other steels. The heat treat's okay. You still could probably heat treat it in a forge. And what's interesting about this too is on my list, I would call these number twos. If you're going to start making pattern welded steel or Damascus, I know people all the time, pattern welded steel. These two steels right here are some of the easiest to use when you're making that. So if that's something you want to do down the road, that's something to keep in mind right here. Another one that I would suggest, I started using this recently as well, but I've been really impressed with the results. It's a newer steel. It's called Pro Cut. You can get it at Pop's Knife Supply. The heat treat's not too bad. To get real good performance, so you probably will need to use a heat treat oven to really get the best performance out of this. But what I've noticed is that it is easy to forge and it resists corrosion. It's not corrosion proof, but it does resist a lot better than some of these other steels. So these are steels that I would suggest. Number 1s, number 2, and this would probably be a number 3, but this might be something when you get into intermediate. So that's enough right there. And all these two especially are really easy to find. No. First thing is, there is no such thing as super steel. There's no such thing. If we go back to this list, some of these have a little bit more hardness on the Rockwell scale than others. But I'm going to be 100% honest with you. You are not going to be able to tell the difference between a Rockwell hardness of 61 and 59. Okay? You're just not going to be able to do that. But if you heat treat them well, all these will perform very good. I do not, again, I might make some people upset, but remember, these are beginners. No stainless. I've used stainless steel one time. I do not prefer it for several different reasons. In my opinion, you don't get the performance that you do out of high carbon steels. At least with the simple stainlesses. There's been stainless around for a long time. But they're coming out with new stainless steels which have better properties, better performance, and such. That being said, though, you really have to be on your A game when you're heat treating with any kind of stainless. And some of these steels require what's called a cryo phase of the cycle, which basically at some point after you've quenched or whatever, you have to stick the steel in dry ice or get like a sub-zero temperature for a long time to really get some performance out of it. I have no interest in it. Now, I'm not saying down the road you can't go to stainless, but we're keeping in mind what you want to start off with as a beginner. Okay? So no super steels, no stainless, at least for right now. If you want to go back later and try this, that's fine. A high carbon steel that I don't recommend for beginners, 1095. 1095 is a very good steel. It has great qualities. The Marine Corps fighting knife, the K-bar, is made from 1095. So I'm not knocking 1095, but for a beginner, the heat treat can be very finicky. Okay? So when you're not familiar with what you're doing with heat treat, you really don't want to be learning on this steel. Now, once you get some time under your belt, some knives under your belt, a heat treat oven, 1095 is a really great steel. So again, I'm not dinging any of these per se, but I'm looking at the realm of what do you want to get started. And this is one of them things, like I said, keep it simple, stupid, because there's so many parameters in knife making. Why don't you eliminate some of the hard stuff and focus on success, especially at first? Okay? Low carbon steels, or we'll just put low carbon steels. Again, I mentioned railroad spikes. You don't want to forge a knife out of low carbon steel. And that really leads us back into scrap. Now, once we continue on with our series and I get into heat treat, this will make more sense, okay? Well, Billy Bob down the road told me this is 1084. Well, it could be, it couldn't be. I got a leaf spring out of the junkyard. It has to be 5160. No, it doesn't have to be. Okay, so if we're going to do a good heat treat, we want to know what we're getting. And here in a minute, I'm going to show you some of what I'm talking about. We'll expand on it more when we get into the heat treat portion of this course. But for now, scrap is only good for, like, if you want to make a tool or something like that, no big deal. But I'm definitely not going to stake my reputation or give a customer a knife made out of something that I don't even know what it is. So I hope this helps. And next I'm going to get into a little bit more of why we want to choose these, just a little bit more, and then I'll show you where you can get these. Before I get into where we can get these steels, I want to do a little bit of an exercise per se of, again, why you want to purchase steel and not pick it up somewhere, have somebody give it to you or whatever. When you purchase steel, you can get a data sheet. Now, sometimes they will send it with the steel, or whoever you're purchasing the steel from should have on their website data on the steel. So on the front page here, and again, you don't have to memorize all this stuff, nor, to be honest with you, know what this all means. Okay, right now, I just want you to know I want to use 5160. Okay, but your steel will have a composition. It'll tell you what is in the steel. Because remember, I told you that steel is a whole bunch of different things put together to give that steel the properties. It's also going to run down your steps for forging, the temperatures, your heat treat recipe. So they've done the hard work for you. Okay, so it has all the information you need to get a really good heat treat on that steel. Now, if I went and found a piece of steel laying alongside the road, as a responsible bladesmith, what I would have to do is take a piece of that steel, put it in my forge or put it in the heat treat oven and start experimenting, writing down data like, okay, I'm going to try to, quench this at 1500 degrees, then do a snap test on it, take a look at the grain structure, and see if that works for me. And continue to do that until I've figured out, hey, this is a really good heat treat. Versus if I purchase it from a supplier, all of that information is right there for me. Okay? So that's one reason why we want to purchase from a known supplier. Okay, continuing on with the exercise. I'm going to use this piece of Pro Cut that I purchased from Pops Knife Supply. It's 3/16 by 1.5 by 48. What does that mean? It's 3/16 inch thick. And that is a thickness that I prefer to forge my knives from. I like 3/16. If I need it a little thinner, I can forge it out. If I need something bigger, if I'm making some Uber knife, then I might get something wider or thicker. But 3/16, and this is 1.5 inches, 1.5 is it's 1.5 inches wide. Okay? And the 48 this is 48 inches long, so 4 foot. This is mainly the dimensions of the steel that I purchase. So, I spent $57.25 for this piece of steel. Now, unless my math is wrong, and it could be, that equals out to $1.19 an inch. So every inch of that steel is about $1.19. So let's say that I want to make a knife. So I'm going to probably, let's just say I'm going to forge it out. I'm going to go 5 inches. I'm going to use 5 inches of that steel to make a knife. Because you can forge that out. If you draw it out, you can still make a knife that's 8, 9 inches long. So if I'm got my piece that's 5 inches long, that is going to, I'm using a calculator because it's easier. I've got $5.95 in that blade. Okay. So $6. I would rather, I'll spend $6 every time knowing that I know what kind of steel this is. I've got the heat treat down. $6 is not very much. So let's hypothetically say then, okay, I turn around and sell this knife for, we'll just say $100. Let's just be simple. First thing is I've already almost doubled what I spent on the whole piece of steel. So if we do the math here, out of this 48 inches, I can make, well, it says 9.6 because it doesn't equal up right, but let's just go with this. Let's just round out to 9. Okay, so I make 9 knives out of this bar, this 48 inches. And I'm selling them all at $100. That's $900. I definitely think that that more than warrants paying $57.25 for that piece of steel. Now, ProCut is a little bit more pricey, so this can be different. For $51.60, that I don't have the figures right now, but just use this. This math will work for any kind of steel you're using, any steel you use. So again, why go with a piece of scrap that you have no idea? Spend the extra, a little bit extra money for known steel, and it's going to pay off. Okay, Mr. Bertram, enough of your yakking. Where the heck do I get this steel you keep on talking about? Well, before I get into that, I want to make sure that everybody knows I am not affiliated with any of these suppliers. I'm not paid to, promote them or anything. Again, I'm putting these names out there. These are people that I use, I've used in the past to source my steel. And that's it. I'm trying to help you get started. Pop's Knife Supply, Jantz, New Jersey Steel Baron, KnifeKits.com, Maritime Knife Supply, USA Knife Maker, and there's a lot more out there. Okay, there's a lot of different suppliers. But I suggest you get somebody that's reputable. Okay, don't go on Amazon. Do not go on Amazon. You don't know where that steel's coming from, in my opinion. Okay, these guys right here, though, one of these guys is going to have 5160 steel. Okay, or 1084. I'm also going to put the links to these in the description to their websites, but basically it's You can find them, Google search them. They're easy to find. A lot of people use them. So this is a good place for you to start. Well, that's going to conclude this video today on steels. So we covered a lot of information, but we kind of dumbed it down a little bit so it's easy to understand. Because again, all those steels out there, it's easy to get confused or overwhelmed. So we talked about some of the qualities we're looking for, where to source them, what to use, what not to use, okay? So I hope this helps you in your process. So the next portion or the next video we're going to be making with our Knife Making 101 is going to be planning, okay? We just don't want to jump into this, 100 miles an hour with no plan. So we're going to go over some things that we want to consider before we even heat up our steel in the forge. So I will be getting on that very quickly. I thank you for tuning in, and stay sharp, everybody.